My 14-year-old son beat his dad's new wife unconscious at their wedding, and I'm so proud of him. The call came through my commanding officer. Your son committed felony assault at his father's wedding. You need to get home now. I was on a base in Germany and hadn't seen my boys in 8 months. Now my teenage son, who stopped wrestling because he hated hurting people, was facing charges for brutalizing a woman at the altar. After an 18-hour emergency flight, I headed to my ex-husband's house where my son was. The wife's dark blood was still stained by the driveway. I rang the doorbell. My ex-husband Conrad answered, his face twisted with rage. We're pressing charges. I'm not taking anyone's side until I see both, I said, pushing past him. The living room was a tribunal. Conrad's parents on the couch, his brother Potter by the fireplace, his sister Fen in the corner, the bride's parents standing like guard dogs, and in the center, the bride, Lauren, with a splinted nose, 2 black eyes, bandages across her face. She was crying, dabbing her eyes carefully around the swelling. And there, surrounded by this mob, sat my son, my 14-year-old who refused to kill insects because he could have been born an ant, who taught his little stepbrother origami. He sat perfectly straight, chin raised, looking me dead in the eyes with zero regret. He looked proud of what he did. Your son destroyed our family, Conrad spat. Look what he did to her face. Lauren sobbed harder. He's an animal. They're trying him as an adult, right? Grandpa shook his head in disgust. I looked at my son. His knuckles were still bruised and swollen. There seemed to be no real excuse. But then I asked for his side of the story. He looked around the room slowly, taking in every face. Then he spoke, voice clear. You want to know the truth? She's been molesting me for 6 months. That's why I did it. My world stopped, but the room exploded instantly. Liar! Disgusting! How dare you? Lauren's face shifted for just a second before she wailed louder. He's making it up. I've been nothing but loving. Her mother stepped forward, pointing at my son. You evil little... But her father grabbed her arm, his face pale like he'd been expecting this. In the midst of all the chaos, my son pulled out his phone and swiped to his hidden photos. She said 14-year-old boys always want it. Said I should be grateful. I saw the images over his shoulder and my stomach turned. Conrad's hands were shaking as he stared at the screen. Those could be... anyone could have, but his voice was hollow, like he was reading a script he didn't believe. Lauren tried to snatch the phone. Those are out of context. I was just... She stopped, realizing she'd just admitted they were real. My son stood up, voice shaking with rage. Dad, I told you 3 months ago. You said she's just being affectionate. Conrad started stuttering. I didn't... I thought... Grandpa, you laughed. Said lucky boy, wish I had that problem at 14. Grandpa's face went from red to white. He looked at Lauren, then at his grandson, and something crumbled in his expression. Aunt Fen, you told me, don't be dramatic. Fen was backing toward the door, tears streaming. Oh God, I thought you were just... Uncle Potter, you said I should be grateful. Potter had his head in his hands. Jesus Christ, I was joking. I didn't know she was actually... Grandma, you said boys can't be raped by women. Grandma collapsed into the couch, rosary beads in her hands, whispering prayers. Every single one of you told me to shut up about it. Lauren's parents were having a whispered argument. Her father hissed, not again, Patricia. You said she was better. The word again hung in the air. But that's not why I hit her, my son cut through. Everyone immediately froze. What do you mean that's not why? I asked. Last week I caught her coming out of Tommy's room at 2 a.m. He's 9. My blood went cold. Tommy was my ex-husband's 9-year-old son. Lauren's mask finally slipped completely. That little brat came on to me. Conrad grabbed her by the shoulders. What did you just say? For the first time, real fear flashed across her face. My son was crying now. Ugly, gasping sobs. The morning of your wedding, I begged you. You said not today. I knew nothing I'd say would stop her, so I stopped her the only way I could. My son then wiped his tears and ran upstairs. He came down carrying Tommy, who buried his face in his shoulder. Tommy, did Lauren touch you? The little boy nodded. Then he pulled up his pajama shorts, bruises on his inner thighs. Lauren's mother screamed at her daughter. You promised! You went to therapy! You promised this would never happen again! Lauren stood there, all pretense gone, her bruised face twisted in contempt. That's when my son spoke again. We're children, and every adult in this room chose her over us. I called 911 immediately. Lauren's family was begging me to talk, telling me they'd drop the charges, but I wasn't listening. Well, that's when Lauren ran to the bathroom. I don't know what she did in there, but I didn't care. 10 minutes later, she came out just as police were at the door. They took her away. I took my son Tommy and drove to my best friend's place. But 2 hours later, my phone rang. The detective's voice was serious. We need you at the station immediately. I drove with my stomach in knots. They led me straight to an interrogation room. Turns out, whatever Lauren planted on her phone in the bathroom had gotten me in hot water, and I was about to find out that monsters like her always have a backup plan. The detective walked me down a narrow hallway that smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. He opened a door to a small room with just a metal table and 2 plastic chairs. He slid a manila folder across the table and told me to take a look. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were screenshots from a phone showing text messages between me and Lauren. The messages showed me telling her she could handle my son however she needed to while I was deployed. One message said I trusted her judgment completely about discipline. Another said teenage boys needed firm boundaries, and I was counting on her to provide them. I stared at these messages I had never sent. My brain couldn't process what I was looking at. The timestamps showed these were from 3 months ago, right when my son first told Conrad about what was happening. The detective sat across from me watching my face carefully. He explained they found these during their search of Lauren's phone after her arrest. He asked me directly if I had given Lauren permission to discipline my son physically. Then he asked if I had given her permission to engage in sexual contact with him as a form of teaching or punishment. I told him absolutely not and that I had never sent those messages. I demanded to see my phone records from the carrier to prove it. He said they would need to keep my phone for comparison and forensic analysis. That's when it hit me that I wasn't just there as a witness anymore. They were investigating me as a possible accomplice. They took me to another room where a technician photographed my hands from every angle. Then they rolled each finger in ink and pressed them onto cards. The technician explained they needed to rule me out as an accomplice to the crimes. The word accomplice made my stomach turn over. Lauren was trying to drag me down with her by making it look like I knew and approved of what she was doing. For the next 3 hours, they asked me question after question about my relationship with Lauren. When did we first meet? How often did we communicate? What kind of conversations we had? Whether I knew about her methods with my son. They wanted to know every detail about our interactions. They asked if I had ever discussed discipline strategies with her. They asked if I had noticed any changes in my son's behavior. They asked why I hadn't come home sooner if I suspected something was wrong. Every question felt like a trap. Finally, they let me leave, but they kept my phone and told me not to leave town. I walked out of the station feeling like the walls were closing in. I drove straight to the law office of Casey Mabelgrove, who my friend had recommended. Casey took one look at my face and immediately cleared her schedule. She sat me down in her office and had me go through everything from the beginning. I told her about the wedding and what my son revealed and now these fake messages. Casey started typing rapidly on her computer while I talked. She immediately filed preservation orders with all the major phone carriers and social media companies. She explained that Lauren probably used spoofing apps or edited screenshots during those 10 minutes she was in the bathroom. Casey said we needed to get the actual phone records from the carrier to prove the messages were fake. She also filed requests for Lauren's search history to see if she had looked up how to fake text messages. Casey told me not to talk to the police again without her present. She said Lauren was clearly trying to muddy the waters and create reasonable doubt for her own defense. The next morning, Derek Oakridge from CPS showed up at my friend's house where we were staying. He needed to interview both boys separately as part of the official investigation. He was gentle with them, but very thorough in his questions. He had my son go through everything that had happened with Lauren from the beginning. My son told him about the first time she came into his room at night. He described how she would wait until Conrad was asleep. He talked about the threats she made if he told anyone. Derek wrote everything down carefully and had my son sign each page. Then Derek interviewed Tommy separately in another room. The little boy was scared, but he told Derek about the times Lauren came to his room. He showed Derek the bruises that were still healing on his legs. Derek took photographs of every mark and documented their size and color. Something feels really off about Lauren's bathroom trip. 10 minutes is a long time to just sit there while police are coming. Her mom's reaction about not again and therapy makes me wonder how many times this woman has done this before to other kids. He had a nurse practitioner come to do a full physical exam on both boys. After the interviews, Derek sat down with me to explain what would happen next. He was implementing a safety plan that would allow me supervised contact with both boys while the investigations continued. I would have to meet with them at the CPS office with a social worker present. It felt humiliating to need supervision to see my own son, but I agreed immediately because their safety was all that mattered. Derek explained that the criminal case against Lauren would move forward regardless of what happened with the investigation into me. He said the boys' disclosures were credible and consistent with abuse. The physical evidence on Tommy supported their statements, but he also warned me that Lauren's defense attorney would probably try to use those fake messages to claim I was involved, or at least negligent. Over the next few days, everything moved fast, but also painfully slow. Casey got the phone records from my carrier that proved I never sent those messages. The metadata showed they were created on Lauren's phone using a third-party app. Casey also found that Lauren had searched for how to fake text messages for court and spoofing apps that look real on her laptop the week before the wedding. The police detective called Casey to say they were no longer considering me a suspect, but I was still a key witness. My phone rang while I was still in the parking lot, and the screen showed a military number. Chandler Birchgrove from JAG was on the line telling me my security clearance was now under review due to the ongoing investigation. He said my emergency leave was extended, but I was placed on administrative hold, which meant I couldn't return to duty until this mess was cleared up. I sat in my car feeling like my whole career was falling apart while my kids needed me most. Casey called right after and said she'd gotten copies of those fake screenshots Lauren had shown the police. She was looking at them on her computer and immediately noticed the font was wrong for my phone model. The timestamp formatting didn't match either, and some of the messages had different spacing than others. She'd already called in Corey Cedarglin, who specialized in proving when digital evidence was fake. He was driving over to her office right now to examine everything properly. Meanwhile, Devin Pineshire from Victim Services called to say she'd arranged for Tommy to have a medical exam at the Children's Hospital that afternoon. I drove him there myself, but when we got to the exam room, they told me I had to wait in the hallway. Tommy looked so small walking in there with just the nurse and doctor. I paced that hallway for 3 hours, checking my phone every few minutes and trying not to think about what they might find. The nurse brought him juice boxes twice, and each time I caught a glimpse of him sitting on the exam table in a hospital gown. When they finally finished, Tommy came out holding a stuffed bear they'd given him and wouldn't look me in the eyes. Devin walked out with a thick folder of documentation and told me they'd found evidence consistent with his disclosure. My phone started buzzing with voicemails from Conrad, who was losing his mind about not being able to see Tommy. The safety plan required all visits to be supervised now, and he was screaming into my voicemail about how this was all my fault. First message, he blamed me for turning our son against Lauren. Second message, he blamed Lauren for being a predator. Third message, he blamed our son for ruining his wedding. Fourth message, he was back to blaming me for not warning him about Lauren, even though I'd literally just found out myself. His parents were calling too, but I deleted those without listening. Lauren posted bail that same day using her parents' money, and within hours, her lawyer had filed a restraining order against me. The paperwork claimed I'd orchestrated the whole situation to get custody of Tommy, and that I'd coached my son to attack her. She was painting herself as the victim of a jealous ex-wife scheme. Casey said this was typical predator behavior trying to flip a narrative. The next morning was my son's CPS interview with Derek Oakridge at the Children's Advocacy Center. My son sat in that little room with the cameras and told Derek everything in detail. He gave exact dates when he told his dad about the abuse 3 months ago. He remembered the specific words his grandfather used when he laughed it off. He knew what his aunt was wearing the day she told him not to be dramatic. He even remembered what TV show was on when his uncle said he should be grateful. Derek wrote everything down and created an official timeline of every adult who'd been told and failed to act. The safety plan they put in place meant both boys had to stay at my friend's house with me, only allowed there during approved hours. We set up a weird routine where I'd arrive at 7 in the morning to get them ready for school. I'd leave when they got on the bus and come back at 3 when they got home. I had to leave again at 8 every night, which killed me because that's when Tommy had the worst nightmares. My friend would text me updates about him crying for me, but I wasn't allowed to come back until morning. We lived like this for weeks, waiting for court dates and investigations to move forward. Then an email came from Tommy's school counselor that made me sick. She'd pulled his records going back a year and found clear changes starting 6 months ago, right when Lauren moved in. His grades dropped from A's to C's, and he'd gone from never missing school to having 12 absences. His teacher had noted he'd become withdrawn and stopped participating in class. Another teacher wrote that he'd started falling asleep at his desk. The counselor had even called Conrad about it, but he'd said Tommy was just adjusting to having a new stepmom. All these warning signs had been documented and ignored while that monster was hurting him. Casey forwarded me another development when the detective called her about finding a voice memo on Lauren's phone. It was supposedly me threatening to destroy her life if she married Conrad. The detective was sending it over for analysis, but warned it sounded pretty convincing. Casey immediately demanded the original file, not just a copy, so Corey could examine it properly. Corey got to work on the audio file as soon as it arrived at Casey's office. He pulled up the metadata first and found the file had been created just 2 days before the wedding. The wave patterns showed weird inconsistencies inconsistencies where background noise suddenly changed. He isolated different layers of the audio and found evidence of voice splicing where words had been cut from different sources and pasted together. The modulation patterns didn't match natural speech, and there were digital artifacts showing AI voice generation markers. Corey said he could prove in court that this audio was completely fabricated using at least 3 different source recordings and an AI voice tool. Casey immediately filed the evidence with the court and started the process to subpoena Lauren's phone carrier records. She explained that getting the actual call logs and metadata would take at least 3 weeks. Every single day felt like a month while we waited. I couldn't sleep properly knowing Lauren was still out there spreading lies about me. Casey kept reminding me that building a solid case takes time, but I was going crazy watching my life fall apart. 2 days into the wait, Casey forwarded me an email marked confidential from Lauren's father. He admitted that Lauren had an incident with a neighbor's child 5 years ago. The family had moved states afterward, and he wanted immunity before giving us more details. Casey said we'd need the prosecutor's approval for any immunity deal, which could take weeks. The restraining order hearing came up first, and I thought we'd finally get some protection. Casey argued that I'd never threatened Lauren and was only defending my son from abuse. The judge barely looked at our evidence before issuing mutual no-contact orders. He said given the serious allegations on both sides, he was being cautious. I wanted to scream that being cautious meant protecting children, not their abuser. Meanwhile, Tommy had his medical exam at the children's hospital. The doctor found evidence consistent with abuse, but used such careful medical language it made me sick. Terms like findings suggestive of trauma and injuries consistent with recorded mechanism, instead of just saying what we all knew. The report would help our case, but it felt like nobody wanted to say the actual words. Then Casey got a call from a police officer who'd been reviewing body camera footage from the wedding. He'd found audio of Lauren talking to her mother after my son hit her. In the recording, you could hear Lauren saying, "Those photos shouldn't matter," before her mother shushed her. Casey immediately requested a copy and filed it as evidence in both cases. She explained her strategy was to defend me from the false accusations while keeping my son's assault case completely separate. 2 different legal tracks meant double the work and double the cost. She warned me this would be expensive and exhausting, but we had no choice. I'd already spent $8,000 and we were just getting started. That same week, I got formal notice from my military command. My security clearance was suspended pending the investigation outcome. Even if I was completely cleared, this would end any chance of promotion. 15 years of perfect service destroyed by one lying predator. My commanding officer called personally to say he believed me, but his hands were tied. Protocol required suspension for any accusation involving minors regardless of evidence. I'd gone from training soldiers in Germany to sitting in my friend's living room unemployed. Corey had finished his full analysis of the fake voice memo by then. Lauren's father suddenly having information about an old incident with a neighbor's child but wanting immunity first? That timing feels awfully convenient. Why didn't this come up when his daughter first got arrested instead of waiting until now to mention it? He found proof it was created using at least 3 different recordings spliced together. The digital artifacts showed clear evidence of AI voice generation software. The creation timestamp in the file's metadata was 2 days after Lauren claimed I'd left the message. He wrote up a detailed technical report that Casey said would demolish their evidence in court, but courts move slowly, and every day that passed was another day my kids suffered. CPS started their evaluation process for Tommy's placement since Conrad's parents had minimized the abuse. The caseworker interviewed family members to see if any relatives could provide a safe home. She mentioned they might need to consider therapeutic foster care if no family placement was appropriate. The thought of Tommy going to strangers made me physically sick. Conrad's sister called saying she'd take Tommy, but only if I admitted I was lying. His brother said the same thing. They all wanted me to confess to making everything up before they'd help. The CPS worker said their conditional offers showed they weren't suitable placements. She started looking at Conrad's extended family, but most lived out of state. 3 weeks into this nightmare, Conrad showed up at my friend's house demanding Tommy. My friend Sarah saw him pull up and immediately called the police while locking the doors. I grabbed my phone and started recording video from inside the living room window. Conrad was pounding on the door screaming that Tommy was his son. He said the safety plan was illegal and he had parental rights. Tommy was hiding in the bedroom closet crying and my son was trying to comfort him. The police arrived within 10 minutes, but Conrad had already kicked the front door hard enough to crack the frame. They made him leave but said without a restraining order they couldn't arrest him. Sarah had to pay for a new door and install security cameras that same day. Casey filed emergency paperwork for a protective order, but the judge wouldn't hear it for another week. Every night we'd hear cars slow down outside and wonder if it was Conrad coming back. Tommy started wetting the bed and having nightmares about Lauren coming to get him. My son stopped eating properly and lost 12 pounds in 3 weeks. The stress was destroying both kids while the legal system moved at a snail's pace. Casey kept saying we were building a strong case, but I could see my children falling apart. The phone records finally came back showing Lauren had never received any calls from my number, but her lawyer argued that didn't prove anything since I could have used a different phone. The prosecutor called a meeting 2 days later at the courthouse where he laid out my son's options while Casey sat next to us taking notes. He pushed papers across the table showing the assault charges could mean juvenile detention, but mentioned something called a diversion program. Casey leaned forward and started talking about counseling alternatives while my son sat there silent and pale. The prosecutor kept checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. Casey pushed for therapy instead of any formal charges, and after 40 minutes of back and forth, they agreed to consider it if my son completed a written statement about everything. That night, my son sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours writing page after page about what Lauren did to him. His hand cramped up twice and he had to stop to shake it out. I made him hot chocolate, but he didn't touch it. When he finally finished, he had 12 pages front and back describing every single thing she'd done. He wrote about how she'd come into his room at night and touch him while he pretended to sleep. He wrote about the photos she made him take and how she said nobody would believe him. He wrote about catching her with Tommy and how he knew the wedding was his only chance to stop her. Reading it made me throw up twice in the bathroom while he slept on the couch. The next morning, we drove Tommy to the Children's Advocacy Center for his interview. The building looked like a regular house from outside with toys in the waiting room and bright paintings on the walls. They took Tommy back to a special room with cameras while I sat in the lobby watching other parents stare at their phones. The interviewer was trained to talk to kids about abuse without making it worse for them. I could hear Tommy crying through the door even though they said it was soundproof. After 2 hours, they brought him out and he wouldn't look at me. The interviewer pulled Casey aside and showed her the preliminary report on her tablet. The grooming pattern started 6 months ago with small boundary violations that got worse each week. Lauren had told Tommy it was their special secret and that bad things would happen if he told. The report documented bruising, and multiple stages of healing and behavioral changes his teachers had noticed. Casey said this report alone would strengthen the criminal case significantly. That afternoon, the detective called me into his office and warned me about talking to Conrad's family. He said any coordination between witnesses could look like tampering, even if we were just checking on each other. Casey told me all communication had to go through her office from now on to avoid any appearance of interference. She gave me a special email account to use only for case-related messages that she could monitor. 2 days later, Casey got a judge to sign an order for complete forensic imaging of Lauren's phone. The tech team would recover deleted files and hidden apps to find the real source of those fake messages. Lauren's lawyer fought it for a week, saying it violated her privacy, but the judge sided with us. The phone company finally sent over the complete records showing every call and text from my phone for the past year. Casey spread them out on her conference table and highlighted the relevant dates with a yellow marker. There were 0 messages to Lauren's number during any of the times she claimed I'd threatened her. Casey called it our first solid piece of evidence that she was lying about the threats. She filed it with the court that same afternoon while I sat in her office eating stale crackers from the vending machine. Corey called Casey's office the next morning with big news about Lauren's phone. He'd found a spoofing app hidden in a calculator folder that was installed at 11:47 p.m. the night of the wedding. That matched exactly when Lauren locked herself in the bathroom after we called the police. The app could fake messages from any phone number and make them look real in screenshots. Corey sent over the technical report showing the installation timestamp and app history. Casey immediately forwarded everything to the prosecutor, who called back within an hour. He said he was becoming less interested in pursuing any charges against me given the mounting evidence, but he wouldn't formally close the investigation yet because that's how prosecutors protect themselves from lawsuits. Casey said this was typical hedging and not to worry about it, but I couldn't sleep anyway. 3 days later, my phone started blowing up with notifications from numbers I didn't recognize. Someone had leaked details about the case online and posted my name and photo on social media. The messages started nice enough with people saying they supported me, but quickly turned dark. Death threats filled my voicemail within hours. People found my work email and sent graphic descriptions of what they wanted to do to me. Someone posted my friend's address where we were staying and said they were coming to burn it down. Casey helped me screenshot everything and file police reports while we installed security cameras at my friend's house. The harassment got so bad I had to change my phone number twice in 1 week. My friend's kids were scared to go to the school because cars kept driving slowly past the house taking pictures. Casey hired a private security company to patrol the neighborhood and escort us to court appearances. The online mob had decided I was guilty without knowing any facts about the case. 3 days later, a letter showed up from Fenn with shaky handwriting saying she was sorry for not believing my son. Potter sent a text saying he wasn't picking sides but needed space from the whole situation. Conrad's parents completely stopped answering calls or messages like we didn't exist anymore. The family was splitting apart with everyone choosing their own way to handle the guilt. CPS came to my friend's house that week with paperwork about Tommy's placement. They said he needed to stay in therapeutic foster care and my friend's family qualified since they had the right training. Tommy would get to stay where he felt safe while getting help for what happened to him. The social worker brought toys and books to help him feel more at home. My friend's kids were being really gentle with him and teaching him card games. 2 weeks passed before Lauren's lawyer filed papers trying to get my son's photos thrown out as evidence. She claimed they were illegally obtained and couldn't be used in court. The motion meant my son might have to testify about how he got the photos. Casey immediately started preparing counter-arguments about why the evidence should stay. The hearing got scheduled for the following month with everyone required to appear. Meanwhile, my son had to go to juvenile court for the assault charges. The judge looked at all the evidence and offered him a diversion program instead of regular prosecution. He'd have to do therapy twice a week and 60 hours of community service at the animal shelter. If he completed everything successfully, his record would stay clean. My son nodded and signed the papers without saying anything. The military called me that same week about an administrative board hearing. They said the negative publicity from the case was affecting unit morale and base security. My security clearance was under review and they were questioning my humanitarian leave status. Why did Lauren wait until she was locked in the bathroom to install that spoofing app? That timing seems way too convenient, like she already had a backup plan ready to go just in case things went bad at the wedding. I had to submit pages of documentation explaining everything that happened. The hearing got scheduled for 3 weeks out with my career hanging in the balance. During the suppression hearing, the judge kept asking Lauren's lawyer to explain technical problems with her phone evidence against me. Corey had found timestamps that didn't match and metadata showing files were created after she went to the bathroom. The lawyer kept stumbling over his words, trying to explain the inconsistencies. The judge frowned and took notes while Lauren sat there looking nervous. Her bruises had faded, but she kept touching her face like they still hurt. After 3 hours of testimony, the judge said he'd rule within 2 weeks. CPS finished their investigation and officially found that Lauren had abused both boys. They also found Conrad guilty of failure to protect his children from a known threat. He got mandated to take parenting classes every week for 6 months. The safety plan got extended another 6 months with surprise home visits included. Conrad started showing up to the required classes without complaining. He sat in the back taking notes and asking questions about warning signs he'd missed. His anger was shifting away from us and toward Lauren as more evidence came out. He started sending short emails asking how Tommy was doing. One morning, I woke up to dozens of Facebook messages from accounts I didn't recognize. They were all saying horrible things about me and my son, but using details only Lauren would know. Casey documented every single message and tracked the IP addresses back to Lauren's apartment building. We filed contempt charges since she was violating the no-contact order through her friends. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing about possibly revoking her bail. Lauren showed up with a different lawyer who argued she couldn't control what her friends did, but Casey had proof she'd been logged into the fake accounts herself. My son started trauma therapy but wouldn't talk for the first 3 sessions. He just sat there drawing pictures of birds and trees while the therapist waited patiently. On the 4th session, he finally said one sentence about feeling dirty all the time. The therapist gave him special soap to use when the feelings got too strong. Week by week, he started saying a few more words about what happened. Sometimes he'd stop mid-sentence and go back to drawing birds. The therapist said this was normal and healing would take time. Tommy was doing better in his therapy using play dolls to show what happened. His therapist was documenting everything for the criminal case. My friend's family was being amazing with him, and he'd started smiling again sometimes. The military board reviewed all my documents and testimony from Casey about the false allegations. They decided to extend my humanitarian leave, but put me on administrative duty when I returned. My security clearance stayed intact, but would be reviewed again in 6 months. Conrad's parents finally sent one email saying they needed time to process everything. everything. They admitted they should have listened when my son first spoke up. Potter started texting again asking if the boys needed anything. Fen sent gift cards for clothes and toys but still couldn't face us in person. The family was slowly trying to figure out how to move forward with all the skills. The school called me 3 days later about setting up my son's return. We sat in a conference room with the principal, 2 counselors, and the special education coordinator. They kept using words like trauma-informed approach and modified schedule while I filled out stacks of paperwork. My son would start with half days and work up to full-time over 6 weeks. A counselor would check on him every morning and afternoon. He'd get extra time for tests and could leave class if he felt overwhelmed. The principal assured me they'd keep everything confidential, but I knew how schools worked. By the time we left, I could already see teachers whispering in the hallway. That same afternoon, I checked my email and saw the promotion list had posted. I scrolled through 15 years worth of peers getting their names on there. Mine wasn't anywhere. My commanding officer had warned me this would happen, but seeing it made my chest tight. All those deployments, all those perfect evaluations, gone because of one incident that wasn't even my fault. I closed my laptop and tried not to think about the retirement points I'd never earned now. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from Lauren's family's lawyer. They wanted us to sign NDAs or face a defamation lawsuit for $2 million. The letter claimed we'd damaged Lauren's reputation with false accusations. I immediately called Casey, the lawyer my friend had mentioned might help us. She laughed when I read her the letter. They're scared. This is desperation. Casey met me at a coffee shop that afternoon with a stack of her own papers. She'd already pulled Lauren's arrest record and the CPS reports. We're not signing anything that silences these boys, she said. I watched her highlight sections of their proposed agreement. Look at this clause. They want the boys to never speak about the abuse, even in therapy. She crossed out entire pages with a red pen. Over the next week, Casey went back and forth with their lawyers. They offered us $50,000 to drop everything, then $100,000, then $200,000. Each time Casey told them the same thing. My clients want justice, not money. Their lawyer got nasty, threatening to bury us in legal fees. Casey didn't even blink. Try it. I work on contingency for abuse cases. She slid a counter proposal across the table. Criminal prosecution goes forward. No NDAs, no money changes hands. The lawyer's face went red, but he took the papers. Meanwhile, the prosecutor called with news about Lauren's case. She's been offered 18 months if she pleads to misdemeanor assault. I felt my stomach drop. Misdemeanor? She molested 2 children. The prosecutor sounded tired. Her attorney is good. They're claiming the evidence is circumstantial. He explained how Lauren's lawyer was filing motion after motion to get evidence thrown out. They wanted my son's photos excluded as illegally obtained. They claimed Tommy's testimony was coached. Every delay tactic in the book. We're looking at trial in 8 months minimum, he said. The court's backed up. 8 months of waiting, of legal bills piling up, of my son having to relive this over and over. That night around 11, my phone rang. Tommy's small voice came through. I can't sleep. She's in my dreams. I could hear him crying. I walked him through the breathing exercises his therapist taught him. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. We did it together for 10 minutes until his breathing steadied. Conrad got on the phone briefly. This happens every night now. He won't sleep in his own bed. I called Tommy's therapist first thing in the morning for an emergency session. She fit him in that afternoon. 3 weeks passed before my son's juvenile court date arrived. The judge reviewed his therapy attendance records and the reports from his counselor. My son had shown up to every single session. The judge approved his diversion program with conditions. 100 hours of community service at the animal shelter, weekly therapy for a year, monthly check-ins with a probation officer, no contact with Lauren or her family. My son nodded at each requirement. The judge reminded him this was his chance to avoid a permanent record. We started the community service that weekend. Watching my son clean kennels and walk dogs, you'd never know what he'd been through. The animals loved him immediately. Casey called the next morning with good news. I filed a motion to get Lauren's previous therapy records. Lauren's family fought it hard, claiming privacy rights, but Casey had found a precedent about pattern behavior in abuse cases. The judge sided with us. The records from her previous therapist in Michigan are being sent over. Casey's voice had an edge of excitement. There might be other victims. We'd know within 2 weeks what those records contained. That same day, I got called into my commander's office. The formal reprimand was waiting on his desk. Conduct unbecoming for the negative attention brought to the unit. It was the lightest punishment possible, but it still felt like a punch. My commander looked uncomfortable as I signed it. I fought for you. This was the best I could do. The reprimand would stay in my file forever. Any board that reviewed my record would see it. My military career had effectively ended, even if I could stay in. I walked out of his office knowing I'd never make rank again. The next few days blurred together with lawyer meetings, therapy appointments, and school conferences. Every step forward felt like 2 steps back, but we kept going because what else could we do? The boys needed normal as much as we could give them, even if normal now meant counselors and courtrooms and nightmares that wouldn't stop. Conrad started therapy 3 weeks later as part of his custody agreement with CPS. I got the report copy from my lawyer showing what he told his therapist. He sat in that office admitting he'd noticed Lauren getting too close to the boys months before the wedding. He'd seen her touching my son's shoulder too long and sitting too close during movie nights. The therapist wrote down every word and sent it straight to CPS as required by his treatment plan. Lauren's parents showed up at my lawyer's office the next week with their own attorney and a check. They wanted to settle Tommy's civil claim quietly without any court filing that would make headlines. The settlement papers guaranteed Tommy would have therapy paid through age 21 with no limits on sessions. Their lawyer made us sign papers saying we couldn't talk about the money to anyone ever. Lauren's lawyer stumbling through explanations about the phone evidence while she sits there touching her face seems like such a calculated performance. Makes me wonder if they rehearsed this whole nervous act beforehand to gain sympathy from the judge during the hearing. My son went back to the school with a safety plan the counselor helped us write. Kids whispered when he walked down the halls and some moved away from him at lunch. We practiced breathing exercises in the car before school, but some mornings he just sat there shaking. I'd have to call him in sick and we'd try again the next day. The prosecutor called me into her office to show me what they'd found in Lauren's sealed therapy records. 3 other kids from her past had made reports that got buried by different therapists. She withdrew the plea deal right there and said they were adding charges for each prior victim. Casey sat me down in her office with coffee and warned me what was coming. Lauren's defense attorney would attack everything about my military service and how I raised my son. We started doing practice sessions where Casey grilled me like I was on the witness stand. She made me answer the same questions over and over until I could stay calm no matter what she asked. Tommy's foster family sent updates through CPS saying he was doing better each week. He needed therapy twice a week and still had nightmares, but they were committed to keeping him. They told the social worker they'd adopt him if Conrad's rights got terminated completely. My son started his community service at the domestic violence shelter downtown. He helped sort donations and clean the playroom where more kids stayed while their moms met with counselors. The coordinator said working there seemed to help him understand he wasn't alone in what happened. Other kids had been hurt too, and seeing them heal helped him believe he could heal. I sat at my kitchen table after the boys went to bed, surrounded by stacks of papers. Legal bills from Casey that ate up my savings and therapy schedules for both boys, court dates circled on the calendar, and CPS meeting notes scattered everywhere. The case would drag on for months more with depositions and hearings and evaluations. But tonight, my son was sleeping in his bed down the hall instead of juvenile detention. Tommy was safe with people who protected him instead of the house where nobody believed him. That had to be enough for now because it was all we had while we waited for the system to work. Thanks for letting me wonder along with you all today. It really makes you look at things a little differently. Until next time. And if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.